camera slowly zooms in on a weathered private bridge, closed sign. As chains rattle in the wind, a man's weathered hands grip the metal sign tighter. What would you do if you discovered that your own neighbors had stolen your property and sold it to strangers? While you were out of town, the morning mist hung low over Crystal Lake as Michael Harrison drove his pickup truck down the familiar gravel road toward his family's cabin. It was supposed to be a peaceful weekend getaway after 3 months of caring for his dying father in Phoenix, but as Michael rounded the final bend, his blood ran cold. A massive RV sat parked on his lot. Lawn chairs were scattered across his private beach. Strangers were laughing and grilling burgers on what had been his grandfather's fire pit. For 60 years, Michael slammed on his brakes, his heart pounding. He'd inherited this property 2 years ago, complete with the original 1960s deed that clearly marked his boundaries. More importantly, he owned the only private bridge that provided access to this section of lakefront properties. "Excuse me," Michael called out as he approached the strangers. "I think there's been some mistake. This is my property." A middle-aged woman in designer sunglasses looked up from her magazine. "I'm sorry, but you're wrong. We just bought this lot from the Homeowners Association. We have the paperwork right here." Michael's world tilted. The Homeowners Association, he'd never even joined their group. His property predated their development by 40 years. The woman, who introduced herself as Patricia Winters, produced a crisp manila folder. Inside were documents bearing the official HOA letterhead, signed by none other than Karen Pemberton, the self-appointed HOA president who'd been pressuring Michael to join their association for years. "This says the lot was sold for unpaid dues and maintenance fees," Patricia explained, her voice growing colder. $15,000 in arrears, apparently. Michael's hands shook as he read the documents. According to the paperwork, he owed massive fees for services he never requested, improvements he never approved, and assessments he'd never been notified about. The dates on the invoices showed they'd been accumulating charges while he was caring for his father. "This is impossible," Michael muttered. "I never agreed to any HOA membership. My property isn't even part of your development." But Patricia wasn't listening. She was already on her phone. "Yes, hello? I'd like to report a trespasser on our property. He's becoming aggressive." 20 minutes later, Deputy Rodriguez arrived at the scene. Michael tried explaining the situation, showing his deed and property survey. But the HOA sale documents looked official. The deputy's hands were tied. "Look, Mr. Harrison," Deputy Rodriguez said quietly, "I can see this is complicated. You need to handle this through the courts. But for now, these folks have documentation showing they purchased this property legally." As Michael was forced to leave his own land, Karen Pemberton's silver Mercedes pulled up. She stepped out wearing her trademark smug smile, her perfectly styled blonde hair catching the afternoon sun. "Michael, darling," she called out with fake sweetness, "I'm so sorry you had to find out this way. But you really should have responded to our certified letters. The whole Constitution clearly states that all properties within our jurisdiction are subject to our rules and fees. Your jurisdiction doesn't include my land, Karen," Michael said through gritted teeth. "You know it." Karen's smile widened. "Actually, sweetie, it does now. We had the boundaries redrawn last year. Legally, your little cabin lot fell right into our territory." She paused dramatically. "Don't worry though, the new owners, the Winters family, are lovely people, much more community-minded than you ever were." Michael felt his chest tighten with rage. "You can't just redraw property lines, Karen. That's not how real estate law works." "Oh, but we can when properties are abandoned and owners fail to pay their obligations, Karen replied, examining her manicured nails. It's all perfectly legal. We followed every procedure. As the Winters family settled in for their first night on what they believed was their new property, Michael sat in his truck, staring at the bridge that connected the lakefront lots to the main road, the bridge his grandfather had built in 1962, the bridge that appeared on every deed and survey as his private property. That night, Michael called his lawyer, James Mitchell, who'd handled his father's estate. Michael, slow down, James said over the phone. An HOA can't just seize property and sell it without following strict legal procedures. There are notification requirements, redemption periods, multiple hearings. They claim they sent certified letters. Michael replied, his voice hollow. To what address? Michael paused. He'd been living at his father's house in Phoenix for months. While he kept his mailing address at the cabin, they would have sent them here, to the cabin address. Were you checking your mail regularly? The question hit Michael like a punch to the gut. He'd been so focused on his father's deteriorating condition that he'd only come up to the cabin twice. In 3 months, the mailbox sat at the end of his driveway, a quarter-mile from the cabin itself. The next morning, Michael drove to his mailbox with dread pooling in his stomach. Inside, he found 3 months' worth of accumulated mail, including several certified letter notifications from the post office that had gone unclaimed. But as Michael sorted through the pile, something didn't add up. The certified letter slips were dated after the HOA's supposed final sale date. If they'd already sold the property, why were they still sending notices? Michael's phone buzzed with a text from his neighbor, Tom Brennan, whose property sat on the other side of the lake. Saw what happened yesterday. Karen's been bragging around town about finally getting rid of that stubborn Harrison boy. Said she's got big plans for your lot. You might want to check something out. Meet me at Murphy's bar tonight. That evening, over whiskey and growing anger, Tom revealed what he'd witnessed over the past months. Karen's been having meetings at her house every Tuesday night. Tom explained, keeping his voice low, not regular HOA meetings, secret ones. I've seen city council members, that real estate developer from the county, even Judge Morrison's wife attending. What kind of meetings? The kind where people talk about maximizing lakefront potential and removing obstacles to development. Tom said grimly, your property wasn't just some overdue bill collection, Michael. It was targeted. Michael stared into his whiskey glass, processing the implications. They wanted my land specifically, your land and your bridge, Tom confirmed. Think about, if that bridge is the only way to access 5 prime lakefront lots, control the bridge, control the access, control the access, control the property values for the entire development. As Michael drove home that night, his headlights illuminated the weathered wooden posts of his grandfather's bridge. Tomorrow, he would begin the fight of his life. But tonight, he stood on that bridge under the starlight, remembering his grandfather's words. Sometimes, son, you have to make a stand, and when you do, make sure you're standing on solid ground. Michael looked down at the sturdy wooden planks beneath his feet, planks that sat on land he owned, providing access that he controlled. For the first time since this nightmare began, Michael Harrison smiled. The war was about to begin. Michael Harrison hadn't slept in 48 hours. His kitchen table was covered with property deeds, survey maps, HOA documents, and legal papers that seemed to multiply like cancer cells. Empty coffee cups formed a defensive perimeter around his laptop, where he'd been researching property law until his eyes burned. The knock on his door came at 7 a.m. sharp. Through the window, Michael saw Deputy Rodriguez standing on his porch, looking uncomfortable. "Morning, Deputy," Michael said as he opened the door. "Let me guess, more complaints from the new neighbors?" Rodriguez shifted his weight. "Actually, Mr. Harrison, I'm here on official business. The HOA has filed for a restraining order against you. They claim you've been harassing the Winters family and interfering with their property rights." Michael's jaw dropped. "I haven't even been near the property since Tuesday. They also claim you've been making threats about blocking access to their land." Rodriguez handed him the legal papers. "You've got a hearing on Friday. Until then, you need to stay at least 500 feet away from their property." After Rodriguez left, Michael called his lawyer immediately. "They're trying to box you in," James Mitchell explained during their emergency meeting. "By getting a restraining order, they're establishing you as the aggressor in the court record. It's a classic legal maneuver, but I haven't done anything. That doesn't matter if they can make it look like you have." James spread the whole documents across his desk. "I've been reviewing their paperwork, and there are some serious irregularities. The notifications they claim to have sent the dates don't match the postal records. And this boundary revision they mention, there's no record of it being filed with the county." Michael leaned forward. "So they lied. It's looking that way. But proving fraud is going to be expensive and time-consuming. They're counting on you not having the resources to fight them properly." That afternoon, Michael drove to Tom Brennan's house, careful to avoid going anywhere near his own property. Tom was waiting on his porch with a manila envelope and a grim expression. "You're not gonna like this," Tom said, handing over the envelope, "but you need to see it." Inside were photographs Tom had taken with a telephoto lens over the past week. The images showed Karen Pemberton meeting with various people at different locations around town. The mayor's office, the county courthouse, an upscale restaurant downtown. "I recognize most of them," Tom explained. "City planning commissioners, the county assessor, that developer who's been trying to buy up lakefront property for his resort project." Michael studied the photos. "This looks like a conspiracy. It gets worse." Tom pulled out his phone and played a voice recording. "I was at the hardware store yesterday when Karen came in. She was on her phone, and she got loud, real loud." Karen's voice crackled through the phone speaker. "I told you, the Harrison property was just the beginning. Once we control that bridge, we can force out the other holdouts. The resort project needs the entire North Shore, and we're going to get it for them." Michael's blood ran cold. "She's working with the developers. There's more." Tom fast-forwarded the recording. "Listen to this part." Karen's voice continued. "Don't worry about the legal challenges. Judge Morrison owes me favors, and the county assessor is already on board. Harrison doesn't have the money or the connections to fight us properly. By the time he figures out what's really happening, it'll be too late." Michael sank into Tom's porch chair, the weight of the conspiracy crushing down on him. "They've corrupted the whole system." "Not the whole system," Tom said quietly, "just the local part. But there might be another way." That evening, Tom introduced Michael to Sarah Chen, an investigative journalist from the state capitol who specialized in municipal corruption cases. "I've been tracking similar schemes across the state," Sarah explained as they sat in her rental car outside town, away from prying eyes. HOA letters that suddenly expand their boundaries, mysterious fee assessments, properties seized and flipped to developers. It's becoming an epidemic. "Can you help me?" "I can if you're willing to help me expose the bigger picture," Sarah replied. "I need evidence, documentation, recorded conversations, and I need you to be the face of the story." "What do you mean?" "I mean you need to go public. Full media exposure. It's risky they'll come after you even harder. But it's the only way to fight corruption at this level. Michael thought about his grandfather's bridge, about the family land that had been stolen from him, about the other families who might be targeted next. What do you need me to do? Sarah smiled for the first time. First, we're going to make them think they won. Then, we're going to gather evidence of everything they're really doing. And finally, we're going to expose them so thoroughly that they'll wish they'd never heard your name. The next morning, Michael received a call from Patricia Winters, the woman who'd bought his property. Mr. Harrison, she said, her voice strained. I think we need to talk. Something's not right about this whole situation. They met at a neutral location, the town library. Patricia looked exhausted, her designer clothes wrinkled, her confident demeanor replaced by anxiety. We've been trying to get utility connections to the property, she began quietly. But every company says the same thing: they can't run lines without crossing your bridge, and they can't cross private property without permission from the owner. Michael nodded. That would be me. But Mrs. Pemberton assured us that access was included in the sale. She said the bridge was HOA property. She lied. Patricia's face crumpled. We put our life savings into this property. 20 years of retirement funds. If we can't get utilities, if we can't access the land, you'll lose everything. Michael finished. Mrs. Pemberton won't return our calls now. When we went to the HOA office, they said all property matters had to go through their legal department. Patricia looked up at Michael with desperate eyes. We're not bad people, Mr. Harrison. We were just trying to buy a retirement home by the lake. Michael studied Patricia's face, seeing the genuine distress and recognizing that she and her husband were victims too, caught in the middle of Karen's scheme. Patricia, he said carefully, I might be able to help you, but I need you to help me first. How? I need you to wear a wire when you meet with Karen again. That Friday, at the restraining order hearing, Judge Morrison, the same judge whose wife Tom had photographed meeting with Karen, barely looked at Michael's evidence before ruling in favor of the HOA. Mr. Harrison, the judge said with barely concealed contempt, your behavior toward the Winters family has been unacceptable. The restraining order stands, and I'm warning you any further harassment will result in contempt charges. As Michael left the courthouse, he felt like David facing Goliath. But he also felt something else, a cold, determined anger that reminded him of his grandfather's stories about fighting corruption in the old days. That evening, Patricia Winters called Karen Pemberton and arranged a meeting for the next day. Hidden in Patricia's purse was a digital recorder that Sarah Chen had provided, along with careful instructions on how to get Karen talking. The meeting was set for Karen's house at 2 p.m. As Patricia drove toward what might be the most important conversation of this entire case, Michael sat in his truck a mile away, watching the bridge that had started this whole nightmare. By tomorrow evening, they would either have the evidence they needed to expose the conspiracy, or Karen would realize she'd been caught and disappear. All the evidence forever. The stakes had never been higher. The federal courthouse in the state capitol felt like a cathedral of justice. As Michael Harrison walked through its marble halls, flanked by his legal team, after 6 months of preparation, gathering evidence, and surviving Karen Pemberton's escalating attacks, this was the moment that would determine everything. Sarah Chen's investigative series had exploded across state media 3 weeks earlier, exposing what she dubbed the lakefront conspiracy. The FBI had opened an investigation. The state attorney general had filed charges. And now, in a packed courtroom, the civil case that would determine the fate of Michael's property and potentially dozens of other similar cases was about to begin. Judge Eleanor Vasquez, brought in from another district to ensure impartiality, surveyed the crowded courtroom with sharp eyes. On one side sat Michael with his attorney James Mitchell and a team of federal investigators. On the other side, Karen Pemberton sat with 3 expensive lawyers, looking far less confident than she had 6 months ago. This case, Judge Vasquez announced, involves allegations of conspiracy, fraud, and the illegal seizure of private property. The court will hear all evidence before making any determinations. James Mitchell stood for his opening statement. Your Honor, what we're about to reveal is not just a simple property dispute. It's a systematic scheme to defraud property owners, manipulate local government, and enrich a small group of conspirators at the expense of honest citizens. Karen's lead attorney, David Steinberg, countered immediately, Your Honor, my client followed all proper legal procedures. Mr. Harrison was properly notified of his obligations and chose to ignore them. The HOA had every right to collect delinquent fees through legal means. We'll see about that, Judge Vasquez replied dryly. Mr. Mitchell, call your first witness. The first witness was Tom Brennan, who testified about the secret meetings he'd observed at Karen's house. Under questioning, he revealed the photographs he'd taken and the conversations he'd overheard. Mr. Brennan, James asked, in your observation, were these normal HOA board meetings? Absolutely not, Tom replied firmly. Normal board meetings are announced publicly and open to homeowners. These were private gatherings with city officials and developers held after dark, with participants parking blocks away to avoid being seen. Steinberg's cross-examination was aggressive. Mr. Brennan, isn't it true that you and Mr. Harrison are close friends, that you'd say anything to help him? I'd tell the truth to help anyone, Tom shot back, and the truth is that Karen Pemberton has been running a criminal enterprise disguised as an HOA. The second witness was Patricia Winters, who had reluctantly agreed to testify after losing her life savings in the fraudulent property sale. Her voice shook as she described the recording she'd made of her final meeting with Karen. Mrs. Winters, James said gently, please tell the court what Mrs. Pemberton said to you when you asked about the bridge access. Patricia took a deep breath. She said, and I quote, the bridge was never part of the deal. If that old fool Harrison wants to play games, we have ways of dealing with stubborn property owners. Judge Morrison has already ruled in our favor once, and he'll do it again. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Patricia continued, then she said, don't worry about your investment. Once we get rid of Harrison permanently, we'll have the whole North Shore ready for the resort development. Your property value will triple. Objection, Steinberg shouted. Hearsay, Your Honor. James replied calmly, we have the recording. The courtroom fell silent as the audio played through the speakers. Karen's voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing bribes, manipulated court decisions, and plans to force Michael off his land permanently. Karen's face went white as her own words echoed through the courtroom. Several jurors were taking notes frantically. The third witness was FBI Agent Rebecca Foster, who had led the federal investigation triggered by Sarah Chen's articles. Agent Foster, James asked, what did your investigation reveal about the HOA's financial records? We found systematic fraud spanning 3 years, Agent Foster testified. Fabricated invoices, falsified meeting minutes, forged property assessments, and evidence of kickbacks from developers totaling over $2 million. Did you find evidence that local officials were involved? Yes. We have bank records showing payments from the HOA to various city and county officials, including Judge Morrison, who received $75,000 in consulting fees over 18 months. The courtroom erupted. Judge Vasquez banged her gavel for order. Steinberg's objection was overruled. and Agent Foster continued detailing the scope of the conspiracy. By the time she finished, it was clear that Karen's operations had affected dozens of properties and involved corruption at multiple levels of local government. But the most dramatic moment came when James called his final witness, Karen Pemberton. Herself, Karen had been granted immunity from federal prosecution in exchange for her testimony, but her civil liability remained. She took the stand looking defiant, but her hands trembled as she was sworn in. Mrs. Pemberton, James began, "Did you knowingly file false documents to seize Mr. Harrison's property?" "I followed all legal procedures," Karen replied stiffly. "That's not what I asked." "Did you file false documents?" A long pause. "The documents were technically accurate?" "Technically accurate? Mrs. Pemberton, you claim Mr. Harrison owed $15,000 in HOA fees for a property that was never part of your HOA. How is that technically accurate?" Karen's composure began to crack. "The boundary revision brought his property into our jurisdiction." "What boundary revision?" Agent Foster testified that no such revision was ever filed with the county. "Did you lie about the boundary revision?" We were going to file it." "So you seized and sold a man's property based on fees you had no right to charge for a boundary change that never happened, using legal notices you never properly served." Karen's voice dropped to a whisper. "Yes, the admission sent shockwaves through the courtroom, but James wasn't finished." "Mrs. Pemberton, why did you target Mr. Harrison's property specifically?" Karen looked at her lawyers desperately, but they couldn't help her now. "It was the bridge," she finally admitted. "The developer needed control of the bridge to access the entire North Shore for the resort project. So this was never about unpaid fees or HOA violations. This was about stealing a man's property to benefit your business partners." "Yes." Judge Vasquez called for a recess, but the damage was done. Karen had confessed to the entire conspiracy. On the record, during the break, Michael noticed Patricia Withers crying in the hallway. He approached her carefully. "Patricia, I know this has been hell for you and your husband," he said quietly. "When this is over, if you still want a place by the lake, we can work something out. The property next to mine just went up for sale legitimately this time." Patricia looked up at him with surprise and gratitude. "After everything we've been through, you'd help us. You were victims too," Michael replied. Karen destroyed a lot of lives with her greed. When court resumed, Steinberg made a desperate attempt to salvage his client's case, arguing that Karen had acted on advice of counsel and believed her actions were legal. But the evidence was overwhelming, and Karen's own testimony had sealed her fate. Judge Vasquez's ruling was swift and decisive. The court finds that the defendants engaged in a systematic conspiracy to defraud property owners. Through the illegal seizure and sale of real estate, she announced, "The sale of Mr. Harrison's property is hereby voided. All fees and assessments are declared invalid." Furthermore, the court awards Mr. Harrison compensatory damages of $250, and punitive damages of $500,000. The courtroom erupted in applause. Michael felt tears streaming down his face as James shook his hand. But Judge Vasquez wasn't finished. Additionally, the court is referring this matter to the State Bar Association for investigation of all attorneys involved and to federal prosecutors for consideration of additional criminal charges. As the hearing concluded, Michael watched Karen being led away by federal marshals. Her empire of corruption had crumbled in a single afternoon. Outside the courthouse, Sarah Chan was already preparing her follow-up story. "Michael," she called out, "how does it feel to get your property back?" Michael looked up at the sky. thinking of his grandfather and the bridge that had started this whole fight. "It feels like justice," he said, "but this isn't over yet." He was right. The biggest surprise was still coming. 3 months after the courtroom victory, Michael Harrison stood on his grandfather's bridge, watching the sunrise paint Crystal Lake in shades of gold and crimson. The Winters family had moved into the legitimate property next door and had become good friends. Karen Pemberton was serving 18 months in federal prison. Judge Morrison had been disbarred and faced his own criminal charges. Justice, it seemed, had been served. But as Michael sipped his morning coffee, his phone buzzed with a call from James Mitchell that would shatter his sense of closure. "Michael, you need to sit down," James said without preamble. "We just received some information that changes everything." "What do you mean?" "Remember how we could never figure out how Karen got so confident about her legal position? How she seemed to know exactly which officials to corrupt and which procedures to manipulate?" Michael's stomach dropped. "Yeah, she had help, professional help, and it wasn't just from some corrupt local lawyer." An hour later, Michael sat in James's office, staring at a thick folder that FBI agent Foster had delivered that morning. "We kept investigating after Karen's conviction," Agent Foster explained. "Her operation was too sophisticated for a small-town HOA president. The legal maneuvers, the systematic corruption, the developer connections had all pointed to a larger organization." She opened the folder, revealing photographs, financial records, and surveillance reports. Karen was part of a nationwide network called Community Development Solutions. Foster continued. "It's a consulting firm that specializes in helping developers acquire difficult properties through manipulated HOA takeovers." Michael studied the documents, his anger rising with each page. "How many cases?" "Nationwide. Over 300 properties in the last 5 years. They perfected the system, identify target properties, establish or infiltrate local HOA letters, manufacture violations and fees, corrupt local officials when necessary, and seize the properties for pennies on the dollar." James leaned forward. "Michael, Karen wasn't the mastermind. She was just a local contractor. The real architects of this scheme are still out there, and they're still operating." Agent Foster pulled out another photograph. The head of Community Development Solutions is a man named Richard Blackstone, former real estate attorney, disbarred in California for fraud. But he's been operating this scheme from Nevada, where regulations are looser. Michael looked at Blackstone's photo, a distinguished man in his 60s with silver hair and cold eyes. "So Karen goes to prison. But the man who taught her how to steal my property walks free." "Not if we can help it," Foster replied. "But we need your help again." Blackstone is careful he never directly participates in the local schemes. He just provides the playbook and takes a percentage of the profits. To get him, we need someone on the inside. 3 weeks later, Michael found himself in the most surreal situation of his life, sitting in a Las Vegas conference room, wearing a wire, pretending to be a corrupt HOA president interested in Blackstone services. "Mr. Henderson," Blackstone said, using Michael's fake name, "I understand you have some problematic property owners in your development." "That's right," Michael replied, fighting to keep his voice steady. "There are several holdouts preventing our expansion plans. My partners are getting impatient." Blackstone smiled coldly. "We specialize in resolving those kinds of situations. Our methods are completely legal, of course, but highly effective. Over the next hour, Blackstone laid out the entire scheme with chilling precision. How to fabricate HOA violations, manipulate local officials, create artificial fee assessments, and use corrupted legal proceedings to seize properties. The beauty of the system, Blackstone explained, is that by the time property owners realize what's happening, they have already lost their legal standing. We've refined the process across hundreds of cases. What about resistance? Some property owners fight back. Blackstone's expression hardened. We have methods for dealing with persistent problems. Sometimes accidents happen. Sometimes people decide it's safer to relocate. We're very good at encouraging cooperation. Michael's blood ran cold. Blackstone wasn't just talking about fraud, he was talking about intimidation and possibly worse. I assume your fee structure reflects the comprehensive nature of your services. 30% of the recovered property value, plus expenses, Blackstone replied. But we guarantee results. In 5 years, we've never had a property owner successfully resist our process. Michael thought about Karen, Patricia Winters, and all the other victims across the country. Never. Well, there was one case recently. Some stubborn fool in the Midwest with a bridge. Blackstone's smile turned vicious. That operation failed because our local contractor got sloppy and emotional. Karen Pemberton was supposed to be one of our best, but she let personal animosity compromise the mission. What happened? The target fought back through federal channels and exposed the local network. Karen's in prison now, along with several of our corrupted officials. It cost us millions in lost revenue and damaged our reputation in that region. Michael struggled to keep his expression neutral. That must have been frustrating. Expensive is what it was. But we learned from the failure. Our new protocols are even more sophisticated. The chances of another Michael Harrison situation are virtually zero. The irony was almost overwhelming. Here was the man responsible for trying to steal his property, bragging about how he'd prevent future Michael Harrisons from fighting back. I'm impressed by your thoroughness, Michael said. When can we begin? Immediately. I'll have my team prepare the preliminary analysis. We'll need detailed property surveys, local government contacts, and initial target assessments. Within 60 days, your problematic property owners will be gone. As the meeting concluded, Blackstone handed Michael a business card and a thick contract. Mr. Henderson, you're about to discover why Community Development Solutions has a perfect success record. No property owner can stand against our system. Michael shook Blackstone's hand, knowing that the wire in his jacket had recorded every word of the man's confession. 2 days later, FBI agents arrested Richard Blackstone at his Nevada office. The raid uncovered files on over 400 active property seizure schemes across 30 states. The national media coverage was explosive. Sarah Chen's follow-up investigation revealed that Community Development Solutions has stolen over $100 million in property value from unsuspecting homeowners. But the biggest twist came during Blackstone's interrogation. Agent Foster called Michael with the news that evening. You're not going to believe this, but Blackstone is claiming he was hired to target your property specifically. What do you mean? According to his records, someone paid him $1 million bonus to ensure your property was acquired. The normal fee would have been maybe $50,000. Someone wanted your land very badly. Who? That's what we're trying to figure out. The payment came through so many shell companies and offshore accounts that it might take months to trace. 6 months later, Michael got his answer in the most unexpected way. He was standing on his bridge, watching the sunset, when a black sedan pulled up to his driveway. An elderly man in an expensive suit climbed out and walked slowly toward the bridge. Morrison, I believe you know my son. Judge Morrison. Michael's hand instinctively moved toward his phone, ready to call for help. Please don't be alarmed, the elder Morrison continued. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here to confess. Over the next hour, William Morrison revealed the final piece of the puzzle. He was the primary investor in the lakefront resort development. When his son Judge Morrison had failed to deliver Michael's property through legal manipulation, William had hired Blackstone's organization to complete the seizure. "I've spent 50 years in real estate development," the old man said quietly. "I've built shopping centers, office complexes, residential developments. But I've never stolen from people, never destroyed families. What I did to you, it was unconscionable. Why are you telling me this?" Morrison looked out across the lake. "Because my son is facing prison time for corruption charges, and it's my fault. Because Karen Pemberton destroyed her life following my instructions. Because dozens of innocent families lost their homes so I could build a luxury resort." He pulled out a check and handed it to Michael. "This won't undo the damage. But it's everything I made from property seized through Blackstone's scheme. $3 million. I want you to distribute it to the victims." Michael stared at the check, then at the broken old man before him. "What about the resort project?" "Cancel. The land will be donated to the state as a conservation area. No development, ever." As Morrison walked back to his car, he turned back one final time. "Mr. Harrison, you did something remarkable. You stood up to a system designed to crush people like you. You saved not just your own property, but hundreds of others. Your grandfather would be proud." After Morrison drove away, Michael stood alone on his bridge as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The lake was quiet now, peaceful again, but across the country, the investigations triggered by his fight had exposed corruption in dozens of cities and saved countless families from losing their homes. Sometimes, Michael thought, you have to make a stand, and when you do, you better make sure you're standing on solid ground. He looked down at the weathered wooden planks of his grandfather's bridge planks that had held firm against every storm, every flood, and every attempt to destroy them. Some things, he realized, are worth fighting for. The Indrachar Blackstone was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. Community Development Solutions was shut down, and over $150 million in stolen properties were returned to their rightful owners. Judge Morrison received 5 years for corruption and was permanently disbarred. William Morrison's donation funded legal assistance for property seizure victims nationwide. Michael Harrison still lives by Crystal Lake, still crosses his grandfather's bridge every morning, and still believes that sometimes one person can make a difference. The bridge remains private property. It always will be.